Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. We have another candidate on for an interview in this show. In fact, we're going to have 2 interviews this show. In a moment, going to be talking with Public Service Commissioner Julie Fedorchak, who is running for the United States House of Representatives. She just got in the race not that long ago, was considering a run for governor, but opted ultimately for the U.S. House race. We'll talk with her about all that. Also coming up later in the show, our second interview will be with State Representative John Nelson. He's one of the incumbents in District 14. The incumbents in District 14 opted not to attend their district's endorsing convention. And I mean, there's a lot of open hostility about that. And in that context, we can also talk about my story with Minot City Councilwoman Lisa Olson, who is a longtime Republican, longtime involved in Republican politics in the Minot area, was denied party membership in District 38, thus inhibiting her ability to seek her local party's endorsement to run for the state legislature. We'll talk about all of that in the context of John Nelson. But for now, let's focus on Julie Fedorchak. Julie, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Chad.
Tell me,
Julie, thanks for recognizing that I'm here because Rob failed to introduce me for the 807th time in a row.
I get rung up on that every time. I'm sorry, Chad. Chad Oban is also here.
What?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Julie, you know, the interesting thing, I want you to walk us through your decision-making process in running for the House. But, you know, obviously, at first you were kind of considering governor. I reported that. And then you switched over to the House. But one important thing I want you to address is when we were interviewing Senator Kevin Cramer a while back, and we were kind of talking about the House race, and at the time you weren't in yet, and he said, "Hey, I think there's maybe room for one more candidate in that race, or at least one more candidate." One of the things he said, kind of jokingly, although maybe not entirely jokingly, is given the state of what's going on in the House of Representatives right now, and specifically in the Republican caucus, where things look pretty dysfunctional, he kind of joked and said, "Who would want the job?" So I guess maybe that's my first question for you, Julie. Why do you want this job?
Well, thank you for having me on here this morning. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about my campaign and my thought process on getting in. I want this job basically because I see all the challenges that are occurring in Washington, D.C. And I have 3 children who are just coming of age and entering this wonderful work world, the country that we all know and love. And I don't like the state of our country. It's concerning where we're at in this country. And I feel like I've got a lot of proven experience over the course of my 30 years at work in government and business that I think I can bring to Washington, D.C. and help be part of the solutions out there. So that's really why I want to get involved and decided to get involved in this race.
So, Julie, obviously, Congress is seniority matters out there, and it seems like in today's Congress, it's the most bombastic, it's the most sort of, red meat gets you the most attention. That's not who I've seen you be as a public service commissioner, and before that. How do you work effectively in this current Washington to do exactly what you just talked about, what you want to do, but with the way the caucuses are polarized and nobody wants to get things done? How do you break through without being the talk radio, cable news sort of talking head?
Well, that's never been my approach, is to get out there and just try to be a talking point person. I'm about results and action and being constructive. And, I've spent an awful lot of time at the Public Service Commission working through really tough issues. I've spent hours upon hundreds of hours sitting in front of citizens through hearings on wind farms and pipelines and other controversial projects. And this is what we do. We work through difficult issues and try to come to some sort of a balanced solution. I think that's what we need in DC, is people who are committed to that approach and to building relationships. That's my strength. I will work with anybody. I'm going to stand firm on the principles that I believe in and argue for them and work for common ground and try to find solutions to the issues that plague us, whether it's the budget, whether it's immigration, whether it's energy policy. There are solutions. I think people feel hopeless that there aren't any solutions, but clearly we know human beings are smart. We can figure this out. We just have to have the will to do it, and we have to work with folks who are committed to the same principles, not the ones who are seeking to get famous on social media or television, but those who really want to get the job done. And those are going to be the folks that I zero in on and reach out to on day one.
When you and I had talked about running, you possibly running, you had stressed that some of the things you were concerned about was are basically like our infrastructure and specifically our energy infrastructure, our ability to power the needs of our citizens and our economy, and strike the balance between sort of emerging power sources and traditional power sources. Obviously that fits in squarely with what you're doing now with the Public Service Commission. Talk about that a little bit, and also what are your other priorities? If you get elected to the United States Congress, what does your policy agenda look like going in?
Obviously, you hit on one of them, and that's the energy policy. And when you get to the issue of governor versus House, this is where I really sort of turned the corner and thought, I actually have a lot of experience that needs to be put into the mix in Washington, D.C. And, we're basically committing energy suicide in our country. We have been blessed with an amazing wealth of energy resources, whether it's coal, natural gas, oil, nuclear, wind, solar, hydro, you name it. There is no reasonable reason why we should ever run short in our country. Yet today we are. 2/3 of our country is at risk of not having enough power to meet their demand on certain conditions. And that's from NERC. That's from the third-party experts that are looking at our systems. That's just absolutely unacceptable. And, Washington, there's just a fundamental lack of understanding in Washington, D.C. about how our energy systems work. And that's something that I can provide a lot of expertise on starting on day one. And I really feel like I can pick up where Kelly Armstrong is leaving off, because she's the source for, smart energy policy knowledge as well. And that's, energy fuels our nation. It provides our economic security in domestically. It provides our public safety, and it also is a stabilizing force internationally. And so we have to get that right. It's the basis around which everything else functions. So we have to get our energy policy right. That will be a big priority for me. Obviously, the debt, $34 trillion in debt, that's just and growing exponentially. $100,000 per U.S. citizen in debt right now. We have to reverse that trend and get back on course. That is not a one-term solution. I think that's part of the challenge when you deal with Congress, is everyone's dealing on a 2-year time frame, because that's how long the terms are. But I would, again, seek to find others who want to tackle this seriously and work on an 8 to 10-year plan. What can we do? How can set things? What kind of a trajectory can we get on to balance this budget over time and start chipping away at that debt? So that's another big policy priority. Obviously, we've got to return some order to the borders. A lot of that is the dysfunctional federal agency. Some of it is funding. Some of it is just enforcing the laws that we have. We have to get back on top with that. Again, the federal agencies need to have good leadership that comes from the president, that comes in and straight down the line. And these federal agency heads need to be held accountable to leading their agencies and doing the hard work of that American citizens are counting on them for. So, and then obviously the the farm bill needs to be reauthorized. And so I will work, arm in arm with the North Dakota farmers and ranchers to make sure that we have a really smart ag policy moving forward, farm bill, to secure our energy or our food sources domestically as well. So those would be some of my immediate priorities.
Julie, you mentioned the immigration crisis at the border, and it seems in the last several months that the president and Republican members of Congress have come together. They brought forward a bipartisan solution that was then defeated by Republicans in the House and in the Senate, including all three members of our congressional delegation, I think, indicated that they were in opposition to it. Why should anyone think that you're going to be able to go to Washington and do anything about the immigration crisis when there was a solution, and maybe not a perfect solution, but certainly one that I think was better than most Republicans would have ever imagined? And then your party, potentially because of the former president, defeated this. Why? People have been saying they're going to fix immigration when they go to Washington for a long, long time. Why are you different?
Well, obviously, immigration policy is a complicated matter. I guess, how am I different? I just look at my record. On any issue, whether it's big or small, difficult or easy, I roll up my sleeves, get to work, and try to find others to solve it as well. And so that's the approach I would take on the immigration issue. We've just got to, get after it. Make it simple first, like what's working, what isn't working, how do we break it down, and build back solutions. Obviously, there are solutions. There just are, and some of it is breaking through the politics and forming alliances with folks who really want to govern, and that's going to be my approach.
Can
I just ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So were Kelly and the two Democratic senators wrong to vote against that bipartisan immigration bill?
So, Chad, I'm not going to weigh in on that particular issue, quite honestly, because I haven't looked at it seriously and in depth. And these issues are complicated. So, but I have a record of digging into really complicated issues. I could put you both to sleep with my knowledge on the grid and how it works, and how cost allocation and transmission policy, et cetera. I will roll up my sleeve and get to work on it and try to form alliances with those who want to make solutions that can solve the problem and put it behind us.
I wanted to switch gears and talk about another sort of intractable issue, it seems, in Congress right now, which is support for Ukraine, and obviously that being a part of our larger posture with regard to Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia. But something you just said, I guess, sparked a different question in my mind, where you're saying you're really good at tackling these complicated issues, and I believe you. I mean, anybody who's listened to or watched a Public Service Commission hearing on citing transmission lines or citing a pipeline or something like that knows how arcane and complicated these issues are when you're dealing with property owner interests, utility interests, balancing all that, federal law, state law, that is all hugely complicated. When you tell me you know how to handle complicated issues, I believe you. I think the Public Service Commission is a great development ground for serious policymakers. But how do you, when you go to Congress, I don't know that there's a lot of appetite, even from voters, for serious policymaking or for people who get down in the details. How do you make voters care about that? I mean, how do you tell them, listen, you should care about, us going through and finding nuanced, workable solutions to these problems versus going on cable news and saying mean things about Democrats?
Yeah, well, that is part of the challenge of the very divisive environment that we have in Washington today. Can I fix all of that? No, but I'm going to do my part by just, again, focusing more on policy than personalities and on solutions versus destruction, and building the relationships, working with like-minded folks who want to get things done. So I guess that's just a simple answer to it. I don't know any other way to do it. It's going to just take consistent work over time.
Julie, you obviously got into this race when there was two other candidates who had already announced, Rick Becker and Tom Campbell, both former legislators who have ran for things in the past. What made you decide? I mean, you obviously decided that you would be a better candidate and a better member of Congress than those two candidates. What made you decide that your voice was needed in this race, and what differentiates you between those two guys who I think, have been on the ballot several times unsuccessfully? And so what are the differences?
Well, I think, first of all, I have really deep roots in North Dakota. I was born in Williston, grew up in Fargo, graduated high school in Bismarck, and graduated from the University of North Dakota. And I married a Navy vet from Minot. So I have lived or have deep roots in almost every major city in the state. I feel like I really understand North Dakota. Additionally, I have had the distinct pleasure and opportunity to work with some of our state's greatest leaders. Ed Schaefer was my very first political mentor outside of my dad, who was a diehard conservative. You will not find somebody more committed to the conservative principles of living them out than my father, Dwayne Lipprig. So anybody who knows him would attest to that. And Ed Schaefer was my first mentor. I worked with John Hoban. I've worked with Jack Dalrymple. I've worked with Kevin Kramer. I've worked with Kelly Armstrong. You can talk to any of them. Don't take my word for it. Talk to them. Am I a results-oriented person? And I think that they will confirm that I am. Results matter, and my record kind of shows of what I want to do in Washington, D.C., and what I will put my mind to and get after once I get there.
That was interesting what you just said, that your father was a very committed conservative. And I'm wondering, I think you would probably describe yourself that way. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what does it mean to you to be a conservative right now in this moment where it seems like that term has either lost some of its meaning, or I think maybe for a lot of Republicans it's shifted in meaning? I would say that a lot of, I think you see it as much as I do, that a lot of the changes that are happening in the Republican Party. So, how would you describe your conservatism? Is it like sort of the traditional Reagan style conservatism? Is it libertarian? What is it? What does it mean? I guess in this moment where, the Republican Party is really, I think, fairly described as a party in transition.
Absolutely. So from my perspective, conservative means, you're fiscally responsible. So you believe in balanced budgets, in delivering government that actually delivers results for citizens, which I believe I have done over and over again throughout my career. I'm, pro First Amendment, pro Second Amendment, pro energy and agriculture. So, pro business, want to have the economy driving the revenues that help fund government, keep those things in balance. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-states' rights. As it comes to, the federal government, I think we should try to get back to the day and age where the federal government was smaller and push things back down to the states. Government closest to the people is the best, and I think that's true all the way down in here in North Dakota, down to the local level. That's why I've always been a defender of, some people have wanted to have statewide regulation of wind farms. And I've said, no, those issues should be considered and determined on the local level. Some counties in Dakota want wind farms, some don't. They should get to decide that. There shouldn't be a statewide blanket rule on something like that. So I think those are some of the fundamentals of conservatism. My dad, taught us to take good care of what you've been given, be responsible for yourself, be responsible for your community. He was environmentally very conservative also. Take good care of the environment that you're living in, leave it better than you got it. Those sorts of principles are what I think are the foundation of being a modern conservative.
Julie, you had mentioned you're pro-state rights and also pro-life. I think we've seen in the news in the last week or so that the former President Trump is now potentially supportive of a national abortion ban. Kelly, Armstrong, Doug Burgum, and others have said, when Roe got overturned, it was because of states' rights. If you were elected to Congress, would you support a federal abortion ban, or is that something that you think is best left to the states?
I think we're in a good spot right now where the states have the opportunity to decide. That's again government closest to the people. My interest in the life issue is really focusing on, we spend a lot of time on the black and white of that. We need to work more on a culture of life. And that's something that everybody, even people who are pro-choice, can get behind a culture of life. Let's support women. Let's support the fabric that supports life. Support women so that they can choose life. And I think that I get really excited working on projects such as that can really help put our money where our mouth is and get behind a culture of life that's just good for everyone. How can you argue with that? It's a good way to structure our society, and I think that's where I want to spend a lot of time.
I'm gonna circle back and ask my foreign policy question now. The question of Ukraine, obviously a thorny one in Congress right now. What level of support for Ukraine should we have? There's Republicans that say none, that the Ukrainian government is not worth supporting. I think former President Trump's position is that if we support Ukraine, it ought to be in the form of a loan and not just appropriating them money. What's your position on that conflict? I mean, if you got into Congress, presumably you'd be taking votes on funding for the Ukrainian war effort. Are you pro-Ukraine? What is your position?
So I think on this issue, there's two things that I'll weigh in on. First of all, we need clear strategy from the White House on all foreign policy matters, this one especially. What's the plan? What are we going to do? How are we going to help? And what's the timeline for, and how do we solve this problem? And how does our help solve the problems? We need that. We also have to remember that the energy issues that we talked about earlier are a fundamental part of this. And we need to have a smart energy policy, both domestically and helping our allies internationally as well. And things like the LNG ban move us in the opposite direction of that. So energy policy is, again, really central to helping stabilize things both at the U.S. and internationally. I think we need to support our allies. Obviously, the U.S. is a powerhouse in the world, and we want to remain that way. I don't think we want to cede that territory to others. But again, we've got to have smart policy that shows what the long-term strategy is, and we have to be smart with our dollars, because that's part of balancing our budget and being fiscally responsible as well.
Julie, you said Washington early in the interview. Washington is broken, and I think Rob and I spend a lot of our time talking about how our politics are broken. Frankly, I'm nervous that we can never fix our politics as long as we're as polarized as we are. And I don't know how we get out of this polarization as long as Donald Trump is the leader of one of the parties in this country. How do you handle it appears to me in terms of style, he's very different than you, even if policy-wise you're in the same sort of place. I mean, how do you break through with Donald Trump? And I mean, Democrats are not perfect here. Let me just make perfectly clear. But how do you fix Washington as long as Donald Trump is so powerful in this political culture that we're in right now? So
I have a phrase that I run through my head a lot. It says, does the amount of attention I'm giving this match is important? I try to live my life that way, and I'm going to try to live my career that way in Washington. And that gets down to, the media, social media, pundits, party leaders all want to focus on personality. And sure, that has a role to play, but it isn't more important than the policy. So I'm going to try to be very disciplined throughout my service and focus my attention and my time not on the personality type issues, but focusing more on policy and solutions, and just sidestepping the all the other personality issues and drama that exists out in Washington. And quite honestly, a lot of it is driven by the media, because I think some of it might just be like the problems are so complicated and seemingly hopeless. So like, let's not talk about those. Let's just talk about the latest interesting thing that somebody said that has no relevance whatsoever. So we got to get past that and just be more disciplined and serious about the issues.
Yeah. Although as a member of the media, I would argue on the other side that sometimes politicians throw out glib one-liners and personal attacks because they'd rather talk about that than the issues. So I don't know that it's all coming from one side. Not that you were necessarily saying it was. Just a couple minutes left. As a practical matter, running in the Republican primary in North Dakota, are you? I mean, we're going to have a state convention here in early April for the Republican Party, where they'll be doing endorsements, and then obviously the June primary that actually selects the candidate. Are you going straight to June, or if you were to lose, are you going to campaign for the endorsement at the state convention? If you were to lose at the state convention, would you continue on to June? What are your plans?
I am going to the convention. I'm excited about it. I like the convention process. I like the grassroots so much. It's one of my favorite parts about politics, is just getting around and visiting with people. And that's what the convention is all about. And I intend with all my might to win the convention. If I don't win the convention, I will still be going on to the June primary, because I think it's important to let the voters as a whole have a weigh in on this issue.
Well, Julie, I think that's all the time we have. So I appreciate you coming on, and I'm looking forward to interviewing you more and seeing how this campaign unfolds.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance. Thanks, you guys.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Cool, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
We just finished up our interview with Julie Fedorchak, and our last question was about the NDGOP state convention, which Julie, I knew the answer to that question before I asked it, but I wanted to make sure to get it out in the public record. But that is every candidate in the statewide races, because I think we know how Kevin Kramer feels about the convention, since he kind of kicked off this trend back in 2012, not going to the party state convention. That's every statewide candidate in these contested Republican primaries who, although some of them are saying that, that they're going to go to the convention, they're going to campaign there, and they like the convention, not one of them committing to abiding by the convention vote, which to me speaks to, and we didn't get into this with Julie, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, gosh, Republican candidates don't have a lot of faith in their convention. And I think there's reasons for that. There's a divide in the Republican Party, and one side of that divide controls the convention process. They're very good at getting their activists to show up at the very small meetings where district chairs are elected, where district executive committees are elected, where convention delegates are chosen, where local candidates and statewide candidates are endorsed. The whatever you want to call them, the Bastiots, the populists, the mega movement, whatever you want to call them, they have a lot of influence in that process. You could even say maybe they control that process right now. And there's a lot of what I would call normie, traditional Republicans who are skipping it. And speaking of that, that's our next guest, State Representative John Nelson. He's a longtime member of the State House of Representatives from District 14. District 14 is a gigantic district in central North Dakota, eastern central North Dakota. that runs from. Well, maybe John, you remind me now, because in my memory, it's just north of like Highway 2, all the way down to like Steele and I-94, and this would all be sort of east of Bismarck and Minot. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, Rob, it is. Although we have 7 counties in District 14. We have the Baldwin area just north of. We have 27 townships in Burleigh County, so we bump up against District 8, which gets into the Bismarck area. We have the I-94, the Steele, Kidder County area to the south. I live in Rugby, and Pierce County is the northern border. But we go as far east as Eddy County, so we have New Rockford in our district. So it's a large area. There's no question about it.
Now, the reason I had you on is because you and your 2 fellow incumbents in District 14, that's fellow State Representative Robin Wise, Senator Jerry Klein. You guys have opted to skip your local convention. And in fact, that just happened. The convention ended up endorsing 3 other people, 3 newcomers, but you and your fellow incumbents are going straight to the June primary. Tell us, why did you make that decision?
Well, we to begin with, we thought long and hard about the endorsing process, and I know Senator Klein and myself were in contact with our chairman, Bill Kuntz, along the way, talking about how this would, how we would organize this so we would have a legitimate chance to bring our supporters to a meeting. I guess any place in the district might meet that definition, but the largest areas of population are the Harvey and Rugby areas. He chose to hold the meeting in Steele, which is over 100 miles from my home, and it was just decided that because what you just said about the activism that's taken place, they are very prominent, very good at getting people to come to meetings. And it was we were just decided that we couldn't bring 250 people to a meeting in Steele to get endorsed. So we chose the route that many districts have over the number of years that I've been involved in politics, not even having an endorsing meeting, letting the people decide in the primary who their candidates are, not a small group of people that meet on an irregular basis to choose or handpick their candidates. And that's what I felt this was set up to do.
Representative Nelson, right before this interview, I flipped through every one of the districts in the state, and I made the determination that the legislators from your district are probably the most well-positioned to influence things at the legislature, between you being the chairman of a appropriations subcommittee, Representative Weiss being the chairman of Human Services, Jerry Klein being the assistant majority leader, I believe. For the life of me, you guys, like in those positions, are so well suited to represent the constituents of District 14. I can't figure out why are they going after you? I pay attention close enough to the legislature. You guys aren't 3 big liberals running around that place. You're well positioned. You get things done. What are they looking for?
Well, that's a good question, and we've said that when we get the chance to speak to people unfortunately in these organized events in District 14, we never got a chance to talk at our convention. But that's one of our, I think one of the few reasons that I'm even considering running again is because of that position. And it's more than just District 14. It's rural North Dakota. We're losing strong voices, to compete with, for whether it's funding or good or policy, to include the rural areas of our state in the success that's taken place over the last many years for North Dakota citizens. We think that we are best placed to move the bar faster because of that influence. But the people in leadership in our party don't seem to think that it has any importance at all, I guess.
You know, one thing when we talk about these issues, I think people look at it through the lens of ideology. And I don't think anybody in this interview right now can probably satisfy everybody who's listening when it comes to ideology, because we all have different views. I think John is a Representative Nelson. I've watched him for years in the legislature. I think he's a good, solid, conservative Republican leader. Doesn't mean I couldn't come up with a list of votes that I don't like, and I'm sure John could come up with a list of my columns that I probably should have thrown in the garbage. You know, but that's beside the point. So I guess the point is I'm trying to say is sometimes I think we focus too much on the ideology of this. What really concerns me when I look at meetings like this is something that you just said, where they decided to hold the meeting in Steele, North Dakota, presumably because geographically, you know, that was more salubrious, I guess, to the people that they wanted to get out, as opposed to the people maybe that you wanted to get out. And I'm worried that that's where a lot of the distrust of this process is coming from. Not because somebody's too conservative or too Trumpy or too whatever, but that one faction has got in and now they want to use the rules or use the authority that they've accumulated to themselves, not to serve North Dakotans or to serve this process through which we select our leaders, but to basically sort of build a moat around the power that they've accumulated. So they decide to hold the meeting in Steele, in the tiny corner of your legislative district, which frankly is about the size of Connecticut. You know, I think as opposed to somewhere central where people from all over the district could have an equal chance of getting there, I think of what just happened in District 38 in Minot, where a longtime city councilwoman, Lisa Olson, wants to run for the legislature, and her local party told her she's not allowed to be a member of the Republican Party. I look at District 30, where we have 3 Republican incumbents in Bismarck who opted, the same as you, not to go to their local convention because the district chair was also one of the candidates running against him, and they didn't feel like he was going to run a fair process. So I guess to me, I really want to stress that to people listening to this. Yes, ideology and political style or philosophy, whatever you want to say, I think is a part of the divide that's going on in the Republican Party. But those divides have always existed. I think the real problem now is there seems to be a commitment to putting the fingers on the scales of this process. Is that fair, John? Because I feel like that was really your objection here, is not that you thought that the ideology of the people at the convention were different than yours or you couldn't explain yourself, but that it just wasn't a fair process.
Well, that's exactly my issue with it. You know, I would be surprised if there's another human being on earth that agrees with me 100% of the time. But, you know, we've always been able to discuss things in a civil manner, and civility is really what's at key here. I feel that we don't have a discussion. You know, we're preached to as to what we should believe. There was a survey sent out to all the people that attended this meeting that was, you know, so one-sided. There were handouts at the tables that were produced by this Citizens Alliance group that were deceivious and out and out lies from the sponsor of the organization that produced them. If he did no better, shame on him, because it was the votes that he used on those handouts were disingenuous, to say the least.
I mean, we should note that's one of your House colleagues, State Representative Brandon Pritchard, is the executive director of that group, and I've in fact written about. I know he mentioned other votes, but one specifically was a vote on a pronouns bill where he tagged over 30 of his fellow Republican lawmakers for voting no on a pronouns bill, when most of those, including yourself, actually voted yes on an identical House bill. So, I mean, if the goal was to say, well, these people voted against this issue, well, most of the people he's criticizing actually voted for it, but he's misleading the public.
Well, that's and the House bill that you referenced was passed, and it's today. It's in the law today. It was successful in law. The other bill that he uses is the human service budget, which our subsection in appropriation deliberate over. I think there was 40. I don't want to get the numbers wrong because unlike Representative Pritchard, I actually care about being accurate. And he points out that there are 43 responsible legislators that voted against the Senate Bill 2012, which but here's the rub. That bill started in the Senate. It came to the House, and we had that bill, and we deliberated and worked through that bill for over a month in our section. And when we passed it out, we passed out a bill that was $153 million less than the Senate version. That was the vote that he complimented the 43 people for voting against a more conservative budget than what we got from the Senate. That we go to the conference committee, and in discussion with the Senate, there were pluses and minuses. We all gave some. We got some. We came up with a product that, at the end of the day, the final vote total, there were 5 people in the North Dakota House that opposed that Senate Bill 2012. It's the lowest number of no votes I've seen since I came to the legislature, and that was in 1997 when Chad's dad was still the Senate Minority Leader, I was very proud of the product that we left with, and to use that as an example was hurtful to the process and disingenuous from his standpoint. I just can't believe that a colleague would, and he was in attendance at that meeting. I was going to use that as one of my talking points if we would have had a chance to talk, but of course we didn't get that chance.
So, John, one of my frustrations, and I can sense the frustration as well, sort of in your voice here, is we often demonize the workhorses that are working on a human services budget for a month and really get things done. And somehow the people like Brandon Pritchard, who don't have a seat at the table, don't have any influence, can't get anything done, somehow they're raised up. So my question for you is, in this frustrating political environment that is the state capitol, why did you choose to run again?
That's a good question. I know my wife is listening now, and I'm really trying to. I
think the representative is under duress.
I guess the biggest reason is that we are in position to make, I think, good choices for North Dakota, and I've got the experience behind me to help in that process and move the process. There's so many needs. I look at the human service budget as a primary case in point where behavioral health issues. I get calls too often from law enforcement people, from BCI, from district judges not having access to beds for people that are getting apprehended, and they're sitting in jail cells and waiting in a crisis condition, and where do they? There's not a bed in the state for them. We are trying to make some progress. We've made some progress in that area, but it's always too slow for a family member that might have a family member that commits suicide or relapses. It's those types of situations. It's people with disabilities that aren't getting the services to better their lives and become more productive in society. And people that are the human service budget. It's always picked on as being so large because it is the largest budget in the state, but it touches every life of every North Dakotan in the process. Whether it's nursing homes, whether it's hospital coverage, whether it's people with disabilities. I guess I just have a sense of ownership that I don't. As long as I'm able to make a difference, I want to try, and that's So I'm going to keep trying until the people that elected me every election since 1997. If they say my time's up, I'll listen to them. I'm not listening to a small group of people that proclaim to be the Republican Party of North Dakota, because that's not my Republican Party.
I think that's really interesting, and I think this cycle is going to be an inflection point because, again, as I started out the interview saying, there's a group of people that have gotten very, very good about getting their activists to these small meetings and are controlling and are wielding what I perceive as an outsized influence over the process because of that. I wonder if they're going to be able to turn that into wins on the ballot, because one thing I'm hoping, John, is that what North Dakota voters want is what they've been voting for from people like you, which is not that we all agree on every issue, but people who are taking this seriously as public service. Chad made the point about somebody like a Brandon Pritchard or maybe some of these activists who sort of stand on the outside and throw rocks at the people who are trying to make policy. It's one thing to sit in a meeting and to get all riled up about rhetoric, about, runaway spending and everything else. It's another thing to be faced with a family crisis because you have an uncle or an aunt or a brother or a sister or a cousin or something that is having some problems, and you need to find a way to get them resources or to get them on a path to being well. And that's where the human services budget comes in, is how are we funding programs to help those sorts of people? How are we, hopefully providing more options than to just putting people in jail? Not to say that people don't sometimes deserve to go to jail. Obviously they do. But I mean, sometimes there are other options that are better for them and better for society. I don't know how we have those debates. I'm not sure that this faction that we're dealing with wants to have those debates or considers them, because it's difficult. Because I think if you're in that position, you want those programs to be available, but then you also have to acknowledge those programs cost money, and the money has to come from somewhere, and we have to make decisions about where that money is going to come from. So I'm really worried that there's sort of a departure from serious policy making because this other stuff, this red meat, if you want to call it that, is just more exciting.
Well, there's that, and the other thing is that I know Representative Weiss and Senator Klein would agree because they get the same calls. I feel that in the positions that we are in, we have some awareness of the programs. The human service web is not easy to navigate for the average citizen. We get a lot of questions, a lot of calls about how do we, is there help? Is there help for, situations like you just referred to? And people aren't aware of how they access that help. We become the bridge between the agency and the service, which, that's one of the most gratifying parts of my job, is when we're able to connect those services with the individual, and the delivery of those services begin and have a successful outcome. But it's not easy to access all the time, and we've been that bridge, and we're three legislators that list our cell phone on the legislative council webpage, on all our campaign brochures. We are accessible, although in the survey they basically make it sound that nobody can get a hold of us. I don't think there's three legislators in North Dakota that are easier to get a hold of than us three.
John, you'd mentioned earlier the concerns about rural North Dakota and the influence that you and your colleagues from District 14 have. I read earlier this week that Dennis Johnson is not seeking re-election, unfortunately, and hopefully he'll rethink that. There's still time to file. But what does this mean? So, I mean, when you're talking about rural schools, when you're talking about rural hospitals, when you're talking about rural infrastructure, to lose the influence, what would that mean for rural North Dakota if all of a sudden it's just a bunch of freshmen representing these rural districts?
Well, Chad, I guess we were all freshmen at some point. I guess the first thing I would like to see vetted is what interest does a candidate have in in the area of rural health, for example. When I began in the legislature, my first committee was the education committee, and then my CEO at the hospital at that time, his name was Jerry Jarena, who became the North Dakota Hospital Association CEO, asked me to join the hospital board. So I think it was my fourth or fifth session. I chose to go off the education committee and get on the human service committee, because I thought that would further my educational process from a healthcare standpoint. And as you probably well remember, human services wasn't a committee that people had a hard time getting on at the time. Nobody wanted human services. So it was kind of funny. I introduced myself. Representative Clara Sue Price was the chairman at the time, and I said, "Well, this is my fourth or fifth session, and my first time on the Human Service Committee." And at the same time, Representative Lee Kelder had come back to the legislature after an absence, and he was in the exact same position, and he introduced himself as the same way that this was his first time on the Human Service Committee. So I think you have to have a desire to learn, and we all have our moments of arrogance and egotism, but when we choose not to continue to learn about every aspect of the legislature, and when you think about having 1,000 bills that you have 80 days to go through and learn something about, it's not humanly possible to remember everything. You've got to be able to focus on areas of concern, and that's what I tried to do. I'm not as successful as some at that, but that was my desire to learn as much as I could about healthcare, and it did help me when I came on the Appropriations Committee in the Human Resource section, and I learned a lot in that process as well. And Representative Chet Pollard was my chairman for a number of years, and he was a great chairman, and I learned a lot about how to go through budgets.
One thing when we were interviewing Julie Fedorchak just a little bit ago, she was talking about her father and how he was a rock-ribbed conservative, and I pointed out to her, I mean, that's obviously what constitutes being a conservative or Republican seems to have changed. And just a little bit ago, you were talking about, you said the words, "not my Republican Party." How do you feel about? I feel like the party's changed. To the point where I know our friends in that other faction like to talk about the establishment. I mean, it feels like they're the establishment in the party right now. Can you talk a little bit about, during your tenure as an elected leader, how the Republican Party has changed?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Well, my dad was a very strong conservative. He was a McCarney Republican back in the day. Now, you guys are too young to probably know what a McCarney Republican was, but that was a faction at the time that was anti-establishment as well. But there was civility in the discussion during those times. That was during the Goldwater era, in national politics, and I think that's what has changed in North Dakota. We've much of the meeting on Sunday dealt around national politics, which we all have interest in. And I'll bet that for the majority of the people that attended that meeting, and the three of us that sat and listened, we don't disagree with the areas of concern in this country. But from a legislative standpoint, we have to focus on state issues, what we can do about the human service budget, roads, infrastructure. That's what we deal with, the practical solutions. And when I got into the legislature, I remember Chad's dad, Bill, coming up and introducing himself and welcoming me into the legislature until he found out that I had beaten Mark Sitz, who was a good friend of his, and I'll never forget that he said, "Oh, never mind," but he always treated me, in a gracious manner, and having a discussion, in our section, we only have one member from the minority party in our section. It's Alyssa Mitzcog from Wahpeton, and we basically throw the labels, the R&Ds out in our committee, and we work as a North Dakota legislature, and in more times than not, we agree on a policy before it is passed, and certainly if she has some opinions as to what should be included, they are as important as any member in our section, and I think that's the way government has worked in the past. It's almost forced to work when there's a slimmer majority in the delegations, and now there with the super majority that we have in the legislature, it's I would refer to it as an each your own mentality, that I just don't believe that the people in North Dakota are ready to do that. I'm hopeful, and I'm betting on the fact that the people in North Dakota want progress to be made, and they want civility in the state. We can be an example of that, and we have been an example of that in the past. I want to get back to doing that as we go forward, because we should be what Washington D.C. is looking at as the baseline for moving policy forward.
Well, John, I hope you're right. I would like to believe that something you just said, that when it comes to governing the state of North Dakota and making policy decisions, the R&D labels go out the window, and the focus is on, hey, what's the best idea for this state? Because to me, that's what public service is. You're not serving your party, you're serving your constituents who have the whole spectrum of political beliefs. So I hope you're right, although I would point out that when I talked about District 38 up here in Minot, the grievous sin that was committed by Lisa Olson, who would like to join you in the State House of Representatives, was that as in the context of a nonpartisan effort to encourage women to run, she noted that the District 38 Democrats had some positions open for the legislature and encouraged women who are interested in running for office to maybe consider that as an option. For that sin, she's no longer allowed to be, according to her district committee, no longer allowed to be a member of the Republican Party. So there's an appetite out there that heard what you just said about throwing party labels away. I'm sure heard that and said, ugh, that's exactly what we don't want.
Well, and that those things can be twisted. I could also say that there's a member of the District 38 delegation that contributed money to the Citizens Alliance PAC, or to the Young Republican PAC that was used to fund the Dakota Citizens Alliance that is going after a sitting incumbent of the same party. Maybe that should be brought to his attention as well.
That's State Representative Dan Ruby, who was one of the contributors when I reported on this, was one of several legislative contributors to that committee among the legislative Republicans. John, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Going to be watching those District 14 results, because I think that one, along with District 30, along with District 38, I think is kind of a bellwether for where things are going to go in North Dakota politics right now.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to my District 14 residents through you, because we don't get the opportunity through our organization. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, John.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.